The moment I saw him, I forgot how to breathe. He stood alone by the bar, a shadow in a room bursting with joy, his eyes carrying a weight that didn't match the laughter around him. I'd sworn off love years ago, but something about this stranger at my brother's wedding made my heart stutter, as if it remembered how to hope. My name is Marcus Jackson, 27, a graphic designer from Chicago who'd built a fortress around my heart after too many betrayals. Love, I'd decided, was a luxury I couldn't afford. I'd come to my brother Derek's wedding in upstate New York to play the dutiful older sibling, not to get swept up in some fleeting romantic fantasy. The venue was a sprawling vineyard, all rolling hills and fairy lights, the kind of place that screamed happily ever after. I hated it. Too much perfection made my skin crawl, reminding me of every promise that had shattered in my past. I was halfway through my second whiskey when I noticed him. He was leaning against the bar, nursing a glass of something clear, his dark hair falling into his eyes. He couldn't have been older than 25, maybe younger, with a sharp jawline and a sadness that clung to him like damp clothes. His blazer was a little too big, like he'd borrowed it from someone, and his tie was loose, as if he'd given up on appearances. I don't know why I kept staring. Maybe it was the way he seemed so out of place, like a ghost at a party. "Rough night?" I asked, sliding onto the stool next to him. My voice sounded rougher than I intended, probably from the whiskey and the fact that I hadn't talked to anyone all evening. He glanced up, startled, his green eyes catching the light. For a second, I thought he might ignore me, but then he gave a small, crooked smile. "You could say that. Weddings aren't really my thing." "Same," I said, raising my glass. "Too much. Everything." He laughed, a soft, broken sound that hit me harder than it should have. "Yeah. Too much." He took a sip, then set his glass down, his fingers tracing the rim. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Carter." "Marcus," I replied, and we shook hands. His grip was firm, but his hand trembled slightly, like he was holding himself together by sheer will. I wanted to ask what was wrong, why he looked like he was carrying the world on his shoulders, but I didn't. I wasn't that guy anymore, the one who chased after someone else's pain. The reception was in full swing, with guests dancing under a canopy of twinkling lights. Derek and his new wife, Lila, were spinning in the center, her white dress glowing against his dark tux. Everyone was smiling, laughing, caught up in the magic of the moment. Everyone except Ethan. "You know the couple?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. He nodded. "Lila's my cousin. I'm here for her." His voice was quiet, but there was a sharpness to it, like he was guarding something. "You." "Derek's my brother," I said. Had to show up, or I'd never hear the end of it. Ethan's smile returned, faint but genuine. "Family, huh? They drag you into things you'd rather avoid." "Preach," I said, and we clinked glasses. For the first time that night, I felt something loosen in my chest, like I could breathe a little easier. We talked for a while, about nothing and everything: Chicago's brutal winters, his job as a freelance writer, the way weddings always made you feel like you were supposed to be someone else. He didn't say much about himself, but I caught glimpses of his story in the way he dodged certain questions, the way his eyes darkened when someone mentioned love or forever. As the night wore on, the crowd thinned, and the music slowed. Ethan's glass was empty, and he was staring at it like it held all the answers. "You ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" he asked suddenly. I froze. It was like he'd reached into my head and pulled out my thoughts. "Every damn day," I admitted. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it pain, raw and unfiltered, but also something softer, something that made my pulse race. Me too, he whispered. I don't know what possessed me, but I stood and held out my hand. Dance with me. His eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he'd say no. But then he took my hand, his fingers warm against mine, and we stepped onto the dance floor. The song was slow, some sappy ballad I didn't recognize, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The dance floor was a sea of swaying couples, but all I could see was Ethan. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth of his palm through my shirt. We moved awkwardly at first, neither of us quite sure how to navigate this moment, but soon we found a rhythm, our steps syncing with the music's gentle pulse. You're not half bad at this, Ethan said, his voice teasing but soft, like he was testing the waters. I smirked. Don't get used to it. I'm usually more of a stand-in-the-corner kind of guy. He laughed, and it was the first time I'd heard him sound genuinely light, like the weight he carried had lifted, even if just for a moment. Up close, I noticed the faint freckles across his nose, the way his lashes framed his eyes. He was beautiful, not in a polished way, but in a real, unguarded one. The song ended, but we didn't let go. Not right away. His hand lingered in mine, and I felt a pull, like gravity, urging me closer. But then he stepped back, his expression shifting, the sadness creeping back in. I should probably get some air, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to follow him. Yeah. Sure. He walked toward the vineyard's edge, where the lights didn't reach, and I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding. I told myself to let it go, to not chase after someone I'd just met. But my feet moved before my brain caught up, and soon I was standing beside him under a sky full of stars. It's quieter out here, he said, not looking at me. He was leaning against a wooden fence, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Too much noise back there, I agreed, leaning next to him. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of grapes and earth. You okay? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head back, staring at the stars like they might tell him something. I don't know, he said finally. I thought I was. But, being here, seeing all this love stuff, it's hard. I wanted to ask why, but I didn't push. I'd learned the hard way that some wounds only bleed more when you poke at them. Instead, I said, I get it. Love's a minefield. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. You sound like you've been through it. More than I'd like to admit, I said, my voice rough. I thought of James, my ex, who'd promised me forever and then left without a word. I thought of the nights I'd spent rebuilding myself, piece by piece, until I was someone who didn't believe in love anymore. Ethan's gaze softened. What happened? I hesitated. Opening up wasn't my thing, but something about him made me want to try. Got my heart broken a few years back. Guy I thought was the one turned out to be not. Decided I was done with all that. He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said, shrugging. It's ancient history. But it wasn't. Not really. Standing there with Ethan, I felt the past clawing its way back, mixing with this strange, new feeling I couldn't name. We stayed there for a while, talking about safer things movies, music, the way the city never felt as alive as the countryside at night. But every word, every glance, felt charged, like we were dancing around something bigger. When we finally headed back to the reception, The crowd had dwindled to a few stragglers. Derek caught my eye from across the room, giving me a knowing look that made me want to roll my eyes. He'd always been too perceptive for his own good. "You sticking around for the after-party?" I asked Ethan, hoping I sounded casual. He shook his head. "Nah. Think I've hit my limit for tonight." My stomach sank, but I nodded. "Fair enough. It was good meeting you, Ethan." "You too, Marcus," he said, and for a moment, I thought he might say more. But then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I stood there, feeling like I'd just lost something I didn't even know I wanted. The next morning, the vineyard was quiet, the chaos of the wedding replaced by a soft, golden haze. I woke up in my hotel room with Ethan's face burned into my mind, his crooked smile haunting me. I told myself to let it go. It was just a guy, just a moment, but my heart wasn't listening. I headed to the brunch Derek and Lila had planned for the wedding party, hoping to shake off the feeling. The patio was set with long tables, white tablecloths fluttering in the breeze. I scanned the crowd, telling myself I wasn't looking for him, but my eyes betrayed me, searching for that familiar mop of dark hair. He wasn't there. I sat through the brunch, nodding at the right moments, laughing when expected, but my mind was elsewhere. Derek noticed. Of course. He always did. "You okay, man?" he asked, pulling me aside as the meal wound down. "Yeah, just tired," I lied. He raised an eyebrow. "Sure. That why you kept staring at Lila's cousin last night?" I groaned. "Don't start, Derek." He grinned, unrepentant. "I'm just saying, you looked alive. First time in a while." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Because he wasn't. After brunch, I wandered the vineyard, needing to clear my head. I ended up at the same fence where Ethan and I had stood the night before. The carved sign was still there, its words mocking me, "Love finds you when you least expect it." I was about to turn back when I heard footsteps. My heart leapt before I could stop it, and there he was, Ethan, looking even more tired than he had last night, but still heartbreakingly real. "Hey," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Same," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You good?" He shrugged, his hands in his pockets again. "Not really. Couldn't sleep." "Me neither," I admitted. We stood there, the silence stretching between us, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, he spoke. "I'm not good at this. At letting people in." I nodded, understanding more than he knew. "You don't have to be. Not with me." His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like hope flicker in them. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice raw. I didn't have an answer, not a good one. All I knew was that I did care, more than I'd cared about anyone in years. "Because you're worth it," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He stared at me, his expression unreadable, and then he laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You don't even know me." "Then let me," I said, stepping closer. "Tell me who you are." "Ethan Carter." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "You might not like what you find." "Try me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. He didn't answer, not right away. Instead, he leaned against the fence, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I came out to my family 2 years ago. It didn't go well." My heart clenched. I knew that pain, the kind that cuts deeper than any knife. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. He shook his head. Don't be. It's why I don't do this. Relationships, love, any of it. It's too much. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him he was wrong, that he deserved more than the scraps life had given him. But I didn't. Instead, I said, I get it. I gave up on love a long time ago, too. His eyes flicked to mine, surprised. Then why are you here, talking to me? Because, I said, my voice breaking, you make me want to believe again. The air between us felt electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ethan's eyes held mine, and I could see the war inside him wanting to trust, but too scared to try. I knew that feeling, had lived it for years, but standing there with him, I felt something shift, like a crack in the walls I'd built around myself. Marcus, he said, my name sounding fragile on his lips. I don't know if I can do this. You don't have to, I said, even though it hurt to say it. But I'm here. If you want me to be. He looked away, his hands gripping the fence like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. You don't get it, he said. I'm a mess. My family, they made it clear I'm not welcome anymore. I've been running from that ever since. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him, even in the cool morning air. You're not a mess, Ethan. You're human. And you're not alone. He laughed, but it was bitter, jagged. You say that now? Wait till you hear the rest. Then tell me, I said, my voice firm. All of it. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine, like he was looking for a reason to trust me. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. My dad, he's a pastor. Small town, big church, the whole deal. When I came out, he didn't just kick me out, told the whole congregation I was a sinner. Said I was going to hell unless I fixed myself. My stomach twisted. I wanted to find his father, to scream at him for breaking his son like that. But I stayed quiet, letting Ethan keep going. I left home that night, he said. Haven't been back since. Lila's the only one who stuck by me, but even she doesn't know everything. I've been drifting, I guess. Writing, moving from city to city, trying to outrun it all. I reached out, my hand brushing his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. You don't have to outrun it, I said. Not with me. He looked at me then, his eyes wet with unshed tears. Why are you so damn kind? Because I see you, I said, my voice raw. And I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. For a moment, we just stood there, the world fading away. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and rested his forehead against mine. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was something deeper, a moment of trust, fragile and real. We stayed like that until the sound of laughter from the brunch tables broke the spell. Ethan pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I should go, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Stay? I said, my heart pounding. Just for a little longer. He nodded, and we walked back to the patio together, our shoulders brushing. The rest of the brunch passed in a blur, but I couldn't stop stealing glances at him. He was quieter now, but there was a lightness to him, like he'd let go of something heavy, even if just for a moment. As the guests started to leave, Derek pulled me aside again. You're falling for him, aren't you? I glared at him. Mind your own business. He just laughed. You can't fool me, Marcus. I know that look. I didn't respond. But deep down, I knew he was right. I was falling, and it scared the hell out of me. The vineyard felt different after that morning, like the air itself held a promise. Ethan and I spent the rest of the day together, wandering the grounds, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his favorite books, how he'd always wanted to write a novel but never felt good enough. I told him about my art, how designing logos felt like a compromise compared to the paintings I used to make. "You should paint again," he said, his voice earnest as we sat on a bench overlooking the vines. I shrugged. "Maybe. Haven't felt inspired in a while." He looked at me, his eyes bright with something I couldn't name. "Maybe you just need the right muse." My heart skipped a beat, but I played it off with a laugh. "Smooth talker. Huh?" He grinned, and for the first time, I saw a spark of confidence in him. I have my moments. As the sun set, we ended up back at the fence, the same one with the carved sign. The words felt less like a taunt now and more like a possibility. I wanted to believe in them, but the fear was still there, whispering that this was too good to be true. "Marcus," Ethan said, his voice soft but serious. "What are we doing here?" I knew what he meant. This wasn't just a weekend fling. Not for me. And I was pretty sure not for him either. But I was scared of opening up again. Scared of getting hurt. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I want to find out." He nodded, his hand finding mine. His fingers were warm, steady, and I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in years' hope. That night, we stayed up late, sitting on the hotel balcony with a bottle of wine we'd swiped from the reception. The conversation turned deeper, rawer. He told me about the nightmares he still had, about his father's voice echoing in his head. I told him about James, how I'd found out he'd been cheating for months, how I'd blamed myself for not being enough. "You are enough," Ethan said, his voice fierce. "You're more than enough." I looked at him, my chest tight. "So are you." He leaned in then, and this time, there was no hesitation. His lips met mine, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, like he was pouring everything he couldn't say into that kiss. It was electric, overwhelming, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Me too," I said. "But we'll figure it out. Together." The rest of the night passed in a blur of quiet moments, his hand in mine, the stars above us, the world feeling smaller, softer, safer. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. The next day was the last of the wedding weekend, and the vineyard felt emptier, like it was holding its breath. Ethan and I spent the morning helping clean up, stealing glances whenever we could. Every brush of his hand against mine sent a jolt through me, a reminder of the night before, of the kiss that had changed everything. But reality was creeping in. Ethan lived in Boston. I was in Chicago, and the distance felt like a wall we hadn't figured out how to climb. I tried not to think about it, focusing instead on the way he laughed when I teased him about his terrible coffee order black. No sugar, like some kind of masochist. "You're judging me," he said, nudging my shoulder as we stacked chairs. "Damn right I am," I shot back, grinning. "Who drinks coffee like that?" "People with taste," he said, his eyes sparkling. I wanted to freeze that moment, to keep him looking at me like that forever. But then Lila called him over, and I saw the shift in his posture, the way he braced himself. She was kind, but she was still family, and family was complicated for him. I watched from a distance as they talked, her hand on his arm, her expression soft but serious. When he came back, he was quieter, his smile gone. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He nodded, but it was unconvincing. "Yeah. Just family stuff." I didn't push, but I hated how helpless I felt. I wanted to fix it, to take away whatever was hurting him, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. As the day wore on, the inevitability of leaving loomed larger. We exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch, but there was a weight to it, like we both knew it wouldn't be that simple. That evening, we sat on the hotel steps, watching the last of the guests drive away. The air was cool, the sky a deep indigo. "I don't want this to end," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "Me neither," I said, my throat tight. "But it doesn't have to." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "You really believe that?" "I do," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in years, I believed in something bigger than my own fear. He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I want to believe you, Marcus. I really do." "Then let me prove it," I said, taking his hand. "Come to Chicago. Or I'll come to Boston. We'll make it work." He didn't answer right away, but he squeezed my hand, and that was enough for now. The weeks that followed were a blur of texts, calls, and late-night video chats. Ethan and I were trying, but the distance was brutal. Chicago felt emptier without him, and every time we hung up, I felt a piece of myself slip away. But we made plans. He'd visit in a month, spend a weekend in my city. I started painting again, inspired by him, by the way he made me feel alive. My apartment was littered with canvases, all of them capturing fragments of him, his eyes, his smile, the way he looked at the stars. When the weekend finally came, I was a nervous wreck. I cleaned my apartment 3 times, rearranged the furniture, and then rearranged it back. When Ethan knocked on my door, my heart was in my throat. He looked different in the city light, more grounded, but still the sad boy from the wedding who'd turned my world upside down. "Hey," he said, his voice soft as he stepped inside. "Hey," I said, pulling him into a hug. He melted into me, and for a moment, everything was perfect. We spent the weekend exploring Chicago deep dish pizza, walks along the lake, quiet moments in my apartment where we didn't need to say anything at all. But I could feel the undercurrent of his pain, the way he tensed when his phone buzzed with a message from his family. On the last night, he broke. We were lying on my couch, his head on my chest, when he started crying, quiet sobs that shook his whole body. "They found me," he said, his voice muffled. "My parents. They want me to come home." I held him tighter, my heart racing. "What do you want?" "I don't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was done with them, but they're still my family." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him to stay, to choose me, but I knew it wasn't that simple. Family was a wound that never fully healed, and I couldn't ask him to ignore it. "Whatever you decide," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "I'm here." He looked up at me, his eyes red but fierce. "I don't deserve you." "Bullshit," I said, brushing a tear from his cheek. "You deserve everything." We kissed then, slow and deep, and I poured everything I felt into it, my fear, my hope, my love. Because I did love him, I realized. I'd been falling since that first night, and there was no going back. Ethan went back to Boston, but he didn't go home to his parents. Not yet. We kept talking, kept trying, but I could feel him pulling away, like he was bracing for something to break. I hated it, but I didn't know how to stop it. A month later, he called me, his voice shaking. "They're coming to Boston," he said. "My parents. They want to talk." I flew out the next day. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't let him face it alone. When I got to his apartment, he looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling. "You didn't have to come," he said, but the relief in his voice told me otherwise. "Yes, I did," I said, pulling him into my arms. The meeting with his parents was at a coffee shop downtown, neutral ground. I stayed outside, watching through the window as Ethan sat across from them, his shoulders hunched, his face a mask of control. His father was stern, his mother quiet, and I could see the weight of their words pressing down on him. When he came out, he was pale, but he took my hand, gripping it like a lifeline. "They want me to go to conversion therapy," he said, his voice flat. "They think they can fix me." Rage surged through me, but I kept my voice calm. "What did you say?" "I told them no," he said, his voice breaking. "I told them I'm done trying to be someone I'm not." I pulled him into a hug, right there on the sidewalk, not caring who saw. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. He cried then, and I held him until he stopped, until he could breathe again. We walked back to his apartment in silence, but it was a good silence, the kind that comes when you've faced something impossible and come out stronger. That night, we made a decision. He'd move to Chicago, start over with me. It wasn't easy. There were logistics, fears, doubts, but we faced them together. He got a job writing for a local magazine, and I started painting again, my work filled with color and life I hadn't known I could feel. Months later, we stood on a rooftop, the Chicago skyline glittering below us. Ethan took my hand, his smile brighter than I'd ever seen it. "I love you," he said, the words simple but heavy with meaning. "I love you too," I said, and I meant it with every piece of my heart. We'd both given up on love long ago, but somehow, against all odds, we'd found it. And this time, we weren't letting go.